This is part 2 of the examination of the 3-line trench system. What we're going to be doing in this video is looking at the side view of what a frontline trench would have looked like, so what was inside the trench, and we'll also be looking at 3 different types of tunnels that they would have built. So the front line trench, the trenches were usually just over 2 meters deep and about 1.8 meters wide. The front part of the trench, the part that was closest to the wire entanglements, was called the parapet, and on your diagram that is number 1. And the back part of it was called the parados. That's number 2 on the diagram. Now the top 2 or 3 feet of the parapet and the parados were made up of sandbags. Now they did this mostly so that it could absorb any bullets or pieces of bombs that exploded nearby. But it also was a way of making the top part of the trench stronger so that it wouldn't collapse. So if this is no man's land here, see, here's your wire entanglements. So here's your trench, your cutaway view of the trench. And so this front part of it would be called the parapet, and the back part is called the parados. And you'll see how sandbags were used to support the top and the sides. So in front of the trench line was a line of barbed wire called the wire entanglements. That's number 3. We already talked about them in part 1 of this video. So part of any attack was an effort to cut the wire entanglements. So you wanted to make sure that all of the bombing that happened before the men would actually charge across the field, that what you were trying to do was make it so that the enemy's wire entanglements were cut. Now, in a trench of this depth, it was impossible to see over the top. So a 2 or 3 foot ledge known as a fire step was added. And that would be this part right here. So we're going to talk about this part in just a second, but this is basically the bottom of the trench. And then in order to get up and over so that he could see over, he would step up onto this fire step. Now, duck boards were placed at the bottom of the trenches to protect soldiers' feet from problems such as trench foot. You can imagine that when it rained, the trenches would start to fill with water. And so the duck boards kept the men higher than the water. Now, soldiers also made dugouts in the side of the trenches. That was little like rooms that they dug out of the back side of the trench. And that gave them a place to go to when there was bad weather or when the enemy was bombing them. Now, if they were on sniper duty, the men would stand on the fire step, and look into no man's land through a hole they had built into the parapet. Extra ammunition was stored in a cache, look up that word if you don't know it, so that the sniper would always have enough ammunition. So here's the duck board. You see the water would end up being under here. Here's the dugout, and you see how the bottom of this part is lower than the trench. That means that very often one of the problems that they had in here was that the rainwater ended up in the dugout. This is where the soldier would rest his elbow so that he could then look out onto the enemy line. And here is the extra ammunition. Okay, let's have a look at tunnels. There were three types of tunnels, or at least three types that we're going to talk about. The first one is called a listening post. And I have to tell you, I would not be good at this job. I don't like tight, small spaces. And that's what these were. So the purpose of the listening post was to listen to the enemy to figure out how many of them there were and what they were doing. A small tunnel was dug as close to the enemy line as was dared. The tunnel was just wide enough for a man's shoulders and was so short that he would have to shimmy into position on his knees and elbows. So he couldn't even crawl. He would just sort of be half up on his knees and elbows, and then he'd sort of have to shuffle into position. The soldier they sent in was trained to understand what the different sounds he heard meant. So he could listen and hear a particular type of sound and know, oh, that means that the men are settling down to sleep. Oh, no, this sound means that they're getting ready for their meal. Oh, no, this sound means that they're getting ready to attack. So they knew what all the different sounds meant. So on your page, I've given you a space. So we're going to have, this is where the Allied trench would be. Here's where the enemy trench would be. Okay, so here's your Allied trench, here's your enemy trench. This is a cutaway view. So they would dig as close as they dared. So that now there's a tunnel. Whereas a trench is open to the sky, a tunnel has ground on top of it. And then the man would lie down in the tunnel, and he would use something that looked kind of like a giant stethoscope and put the sound, or the stethoscope, it was called a geoscope, up here, and listen to what was going on in here. So the operator also had a rope tied around his waist so he could be pulled out if there was an emergency. He had a device with him called a geophone for listening, and as I said, it looked like a large stethoscope. He also had an air hose so he could get fresh oxygen, because as you can imagine, with this being so long but so tiny, you could run out of oxygen very quickly. So there would be another soldier over here who was cranking an air pump to make sure that this person always had oxygen. So we're going to draw this diagram on the box in your paper. So pause the video right now so that you can do that. I wanted to show you what a geophone looked like. When I was on one of my tours in Europe, I was in a museum and I saw this. And this is an actual geophone that was used during World War I. So this is the part that they would put up against the dirt, and this is the part that they would listen through. Okay, the second type of tunnel is called a mined tunnel. Now, a mined tunnel was a tunnel that ended in a sort of a room at the end of it. It was dug as close to being right under the enemy line as possible. And then that little room was filled with explosives. Those explosives would have fuses that would go all the way back to your line, and on command you would light the fuses, and of course the all of the explosives that were underground would explode. So at the proper time, the explosives were set off. The explosion coming from below forced dirt upward, creating huge craters. Those craters could be used to provide cover when fighting uphill. If you do not know the word crater, please do a translation or look it up. You can also do a Google image search so that you can see what a crater looks like. A crater is basically a big hole in the earth. So we're going to draw a diagram of a mined tunnel on the box. So here's your box. So here is your tunnel. So you've got this tunnel, and you'll notice that it's taller than the other one because it has to be tall enough for a man to be able to walk down. So he's going to walk down, and in this area, remember we talked about a room at the end? Well, this is the room. Okay, so the enemy trench is going to be either right here or right here. Now, the room at the end gets filled with explosives so that when it explodes, the zone of explosion will go upward, okay? So that way, anything that's above this is going to be destroyed. All right, the third type that we're going to talk about is subways. Now, this is the last of the tunnels. Subways were underground highways for soldiers to get farther across no man's land safely. So they were very, very big tunnels. So they were large tunnels that ended in huge rooms and a staircase to get up to ground level. At the go order, the men in the subway would run out and be closer to the enemy line so they could attack more quickly and more safely. The subways could hold up to 1,000 men. So we're going to draw the diagram of a subway on the box on your paper. So what does it look like? Well, there's the ground. You'll see how much bigger this subway is. So it's much taller, and it has a big room at the end. And I'm sorry, I'm not very good at this drawing things using the computer, but that's the stairway. And then they end up at ground level again. And here we have the zombie army. I'm sorry, I'm not, again, not great at this, but I thought they were kind of cute. So we've got the men who are being held here at the go order. They all will go up the stairs, and then they will go across no man's land, but they won't have had to have crossed all of this space open to enemy fire. So they're much closer and therefore much more likely to be successful. Okay, and that is it. We've now completed our look at the side view, the front view, and the aerial view of the three-line trench system. Thanks for listening.